Alrighty, here we go. It's episode 1 of the Help Me Understand podcast. Well, I'm doing it. Yes, that is right. This is actually happening. I'd like to first start by thanking my business coach, Cass, for pushing me to do something like this, because it has been an interest of mine for a while, I will say, but has just felt like entirely way too much work. And then I'm the type of person who will sometimes get gummed up with how I am planning things and thinking about things. I make a decision, I second guess it, I go around in circles. Then it feels like I'm procrastinating and I hate myself for procrastinating. And it's just this vicious cycle of never getting anything done. So thank you, Cass. It's really helpful to have someone in your corner who is pushing you to be better and is helping to keep the bumpers up in the bowling lane. That's for sure. And thanks to her, I can sit down and I can record something like this and not have too many second guesses about it. Although I will say, this is my third attempt at recording something like this. The first attempt, I was just too nervous and it was up here the whole time and, hey, everyone, please listen to my podcast. I hope you love it. The second one was better, but was really unfocused and all over the place. And I recorded the second one and I was like, yeah, this is awesome. And then the next day I listened to the second one and I was like, I don't know where I'm going with any of this. So here I am now, recording this for the third time. And the purpose of this episode is to share with you a little bit about why I'm doing this. And I've been reflecting on that a lot. And my goodness, is it difficult to figure out why we do things? That's so challenging because the why sits in a different part of the brain than our language. And so it's really been a process of me having lots of conversations with Ollie, conversations with guests who will be on the podcast shortly, and conversations with my journal, even in meditation or in my yoga practice, just thinking through what is this? What's going on here? Why am I starting a podcast? And so what I'd love to do today is share with you the story about my mom, because she has a lot to do. She's a big, big part of my why. And if you're listening to this, you probably have heard some part of the story about my mom, depending on the last time I talked about it. You know, I talk about that story differently in different seasons of my life. And to be honest, it's been a while since I've told the story. Because I don't know, does this ever happen to you where you tell a version of a story of something, a big piece of your life, of who you are, and then you kind of get stuck telling that same version of the story over and over again, and it doesn't feel like you're getting much growth or learning or traction from it? You're just kind of getting yourself more lodged in the version of the story that you're telling. Maybe you know what I'm talking about. In any case, I was feeling stuck in that story. And I still don't even think I know how to talk about it. This might be one of those things that I have to come back and revisit. But I'll start where I usually start the story, which is that when I was 8 years old, my mom sat us down in the living room and had a very formal conversation with us where she told us that she was sick. I honestly don't remember the details of that conversation. It's more of like a visual memory. I remember the drapes and how they were like these dark maroon drapes and the sun was coming through. It was hitting the floor in a really pretty burnt orange color. And it was this weird dichotomy between the crazy information I was hearing from her and this just kind of moment where you're observing some mundane, beautiful thing in life that is totally meaningless, but for some reason it strikes you in that moment and you're like, oh my gosh, life is amazing. So I had that little moment as she's telling me this story, maybe just to, or telling me this information about her being sick. And maybe I needed that little piece of beauty in that moment. And we soon found after that it was an autoimmune thing. Maybe she even told us on that day. And I was 8 years old, so I had no idea what autoimmune meant. I knew it was bad. It felt like a bomb had dropped. And I felt like my life would never be the same again. And it felt like I was really alone because none of my friends could relate to what I was going through. And although at the time I regarded my relationship with my mom to be a very close relationship, it was not healthy. It's hard for me to talk about my mom. She's dead now, by the way, in case that wasn't obvious. But it's hard for me to talk about her because she's not here to defend herself. And I've always been hesitant about bringing her up, especially in these more like public forums, because in some way it doesn't feel like my story to tell. But on the other hand, I feel like if I don't tell it, then I'm being inauthentic and I'm not actually living my truth or really in touch with my own why. And so I want to tread carefully here, and I'm going to mess this up the same way I'm going to mess up this podcast and how I talk to all my guests and all of that kind of stuff. I want to do right by her. And so I'm going to do my best to be fair to her. And you'll kind of get to see, I guess, where I am in this healing process. And if you happen to be a trauma therapist or anyone like that, you will probably see right through me to exactly where all of my issues are. Which, by the way, if you can see where all of my issues are, I really, really beg you to tell me about them. Like, leave a review and or somehow get in touch with me. Reply to one of my emails, write a comment, wherever you are, and tell me, because I want to know. My mom, she really struggled with life. She really struggled with life. And there was always love between us. That was never the question. And I could always feel that love too. It wasn't like the love was obstructed. But there was something else between us too. And that was a dynamic that was not healthy, but that neither one of us really knew was not healthy. When she had me at 30 years old, she picked a partner who, if for some reason it was really important to her to have beautiful children. And I really feel the burden of that in my life in a way that's hard to describe. But it was really important for her to have beautiful children, and because of that, that really informed her choice of a life partner. I don't think she had very much success with men before she met my dad. She was married briefly and to somebody who she described as being bipolar and also being the love of her life. And then that didn't work out. And so by the time she met my dad, I think she was just looking for somebody with good genes, somebody who would give her beautiful children. She really wanted a girl. She did not want a boy. And I think she thought that children were going to be her way of feeling okay in the world. I don't think she was finding what she was looking for in her relationships with men, in the relationships she had with the people in her family, in her friendships, in her career. I don't think any of those aspects of her life were firing on all cylinders. And I think she thought that having a baby, it was going to be, a little mini her, and it would create this alliance, and it would be us against the world. And the reason I'm saying this is because, her being dead, she's been gone now for 10 years. She died when I was 25. All I really have to go on at this point are home movies. I was born in 1988. That was the year of those huge camcorders. And so we have just the most mundane shit recorded from my childhood, and especially those early years. And so where I'm getting this hunch that I have is from watching those videos back, looking at how she regarded me, the attention that she gave me. I mean, there was just no doubt that I was so, so loved. She loved me more than anything. And at the same time, it's pretty clear, both from the videos and from many conversations that I had with her when she was still with us, that her relationship with my dad was not improving. And so what she found in my dad was somebody whose genes she liked. That was very important. And she also found in him somebody who was dependable. He really wanted a family. He was there. And, he was very go with the flow. And she liked that because she was very strong-willed. She was very controlling. There was no question as to who was in charge in our household. My mom was in charge in our household. And things were okay between me and my mom for the first couple of years. And then she had another baby when I was 2.5. And there's this scene, my sister's getting her first bath, coming home from the hospital. We're both in the sink. And I have this vague memory of this actually, which is hilarious. I remember begging my parents to let me take a bath in the kitchen sink. And they were kind of fussing with me and like, no, you're too big. And it had been forever since I'd been in the sink. But they indulged me and they put me in the sink. And I remember just loving that. Like, yes, I'm in the sink. This is the best. So my dad is holding the camcorder. My mom is giving both of us baths. I'm playing with this little washcloth. And you can tell, by the way, my mom has given birth like a week ago, if that. And you can tell she hasn't slept. She's stressed to the frickin' max, right? I have this washcloth that I'm playing with on my side of the sink. And at some point, my mom needs the washcloth for my sister. And so she grabs the washcloth, and reflexively, I'm holding onto it with both hands, and I grip harder onto the washcloth. And she's like, I don't remember verbatim what she said. We'll have to watch the videos. But she says, give me the washcloth. I'll give it back in a second. And you can see my reaction to her. I'm almost afraid. It's this, like, wow, she's speaking to me in this kind of intense way that I'm not used to. And I'm getting kind of two messages from her. I'm getting the message of she needs the washcloth. Obviously, she's saying she needs the washcloth. But at a much more basic level, the message that I'm getting from her is, oh, I'm frustrated. I'm so frustrated. And the way I react to that is almost like, oh no. I can see exactly, I can feel in my body as a 36-year-old, I can feel in my body what I was feeling when I was 2.5 in that sink. And then I'm holding onto the washcloth, and she says, "I need the washcloth. I'll give it back in a second." So she repeats the same thing that she just said, but she now raises the emotional state of it, to which I sort of double down on my fear response. It's like a freeze fear response. And this is sort of a really great example of how life becomes in our house. This very impatient, frustrated, anxious place where now she has 2 children. She has a husband whom she doesn't really respect. She doesn't feel like she has a great partner in him. She feels like she has to boss him around in order to get what she needs. And the dynamics start to become really unhealthy. Her not knowing really how to deal with me means that as the older sibling, I end up getting put in timeout a lot, which I know because she kind of wrote me some journals during that time. She talks about how she felt so bad that she was putting me in timeout all the time. And I remember those timeouts, and I remember being very confused and feeling very alone and feeling like I was a bad kid. And eventually what this did is it put this seed inside of my body of, I am bad. There is something wrong with me. And as I get older and I develop the capacity for language and independence, it's only natural that your parents start expecting you to do chores and clean up around the house and all of that kind of stuff. But I'm already feeling like such a POS. My gosh, I just felt so terrible about myself. I'm fighting with my sister all the time. That seemed like it was kind of always my fault, like I was the antagonist. I was being very bossy. And so what ended up happening was when my mom was unhappy with the way that I was behaving, at some point you don't put your kid in timeout. At some point you start grounding them or taking away their privileges, which seemed like I was always grounded or had was on some sort of restriction, no TV, no friends, no this, that, or the other. But even worse than that was that there was a lot of name calling. So almost on a daily basis, I would hear things like, "You're a brat, you're bossy, you're irresponsible, you're lazy." When I got older, "You're a bitch." And this was always told to me as almost like feedback to try to make me better. But of course, that's not how I took it. I took it as validation that I was so messed up as I had thought that I was. And it kind of continued that spiral. So all of this was already happening by the time I was 8 years old. By the time I was 8 years old, there was some dynamics between me and my mom that were not healthy. My sister and I never really developed a sense of closeness because I think I always sort of perceived her as a threat in some way. And then I was also sort of distant from my dad because there was distance between my mom and my dad, although they stayed married for a very long time. Well into her being sick, they were married. There was a ton of distance. It was like they really only talked to each other when they needed to talk to each other. And a lot of the interaction was very, very negative, where my mom was expressing criticism about my dad. He basically could never do anything right. And they were already, by this point, sleeping in separate bedrooms. So all of that is going on by the time she tells us she's sick. And now we have to go figure out what's going on with this sickness. So the first phase of that was her finding her doctors. That was really hard for her. Now, she was a nurse in the ER in Children's Hospital, so she had great fluency in that whole space, and also connections. She knew who she was supposed to go to for what. It was sort of like she was already primed to deal with that system as a patient. But one of the first barriers that we encountered here was that she had a really hard time finding doctors who believed her of what was her symptoms. So her initial symptoms, she knew she was getting sick because her vision was depleting. And it wasn't just that she felt like she was going blind, but it was like there would be like weird spots in her visual field that would stay there for days and obstruct big parts of her vision. Her peripheral vision kind of disappeared at some point. But then she would go to the doctor and they would do all the tests and the tests would come back negative, and they would basically tell her she was lying. You aren't sick. You are not experiencing these symptoms. Now, this is 1996 when all of this is happening. Autoimmune illness at that time was not prolific. It was not a household name. People looked at you when you said autoimmune illness and they're like, what? And then at the time, the only other autoimmune disease that people were really talking about was lupus. And so I heard all the time as a kid, oh, your mom has lupus? No, we don't actually know what she has. At first, because the doctors don't even believe any of her symptoms. So finally, she ended up finding doctors who believed her, and they kind of all revolved around her rheumatologist. Right now, when I'm recording this, I'm forgetting what a rheumatologist does. We can look it up. And so she found great doctors who believed her. And that was really important because it allowed her to open up a really honest dialogue with them. But they had no idea how to help her. They were just sort of like, oh, Renee, you're the crazy one again. And the way that the tools that modern medicine has at its disposal to help people are really quite limited, as we found out. They can give you a shot, they can give you a pill, or they can do a surgery. And boy, did they run the gamut on her. My gosh. I mean, this lady survived for 17 years after the initial onset of her illness. And there was a lot of poking and prodding there. So she had dozens of surgeries in that 17-year period, probably half of which were on her eyes. And I'm, growing up during this time. I'm an 8-year-old, a 12-year-old, blah, blah, blah. I don't even know what's going on half the time. I don't understand the conversations that the adults are having. And then the adults are not really having separate conversations with me or my sister to help kind of dumb it down and explain it to us in a way that we could actually get or grasp. So we sort of learned to connect the dots based on what we understood from what the adults were talking about. But there was nobody there who was trying to help us make sense of it. And I feel like my mom was really locked inside of herself. She felt very alone during this time, and I could see why. My mom was the sort of person who didn't want to talk about how in pain she was. She didn't want to burden people. She never even, she was legally blind for many of those 17 years. She never used a blind cane. And her not wanting to be a burden, and me kind of like doing my own psychology work and looking at the ways in which I'm very similar to her in a lot of ways, I think I know why. I think it was because her inner experience occurred to her, like when she felt something unpleasant in her body, the way it occurred to her was through a very kind of nasty, judgmental voice in her head that was judging what was happening and creating an interpretation of what was happening and was going that route. For example, my dad is painting in the house, let's say. She's trying to rest in her room, but this is their closet. And so the fumes for the paint are traveling from the closet into the room, and she gets upset about it. And she calls him an asshole. Well, maybe he wasn't really being an asshole. Maybe he just wasn't thinking, 2 steps ahead and did this completely unintentionally and was actually trying to do something nice for her because she had been telling him to paint the closet for a million years. But this is, I bring that up because of the voice in her head. And I think that this voice in her head, sort of like the narration of life, who she was, who everyone else was, what the world was like, was a very nasty, judgmental voice. And I know that because I have experienced what I think to be something quite similar. And in some way, I think she was trying to shield people from that. And that was why she was not communicating with us what was going on with her. Of course, until things came to a boiling point, and then she would explode. And that voice would just come out without filter, and we would all pay the price. And I can really empathize now that I'm no longer on the receiving ends of those blowups with how much pain and how confusing, how confusing it is when you have that voice in your head saying that kind of bullshit. Oh, so I get it in some sense. But back to the story. The surgeries, her eyes, there's a ton of eye surgeries there. Other surgeries that they would do on her would be, she just started growing random bones in different kind of either fatty or muscly areas of her body. Just little tennis balls, golf balls. And so every once in a while, they would go in and cut one of those out. And then there would be sort of like this cavity of nothingness inside of her butt cheek or, wherever they cut it out from. They would do biopsies. They did a lot of biopsies there at the end. What ultimately ended up taking her was her heart. And so for the last 8 years, she was a heart patient. She'd had 2 minor heart attacks. And then the last heart attack was the one that took her. So she did have some surgeries to put stents in. There was a lot going on. And on top of this is happening to somebody in my life who I can't really have a good conversation with. On the one hand, I love her more than anything. And I know that she was doing her absolute best, and that I have no idea really the extent of the pain that she was really experiencing. And I believe her that she was in pain. It was hell. It was hell for me to grow up in that space. And I'm sure it was hell to experience what she was experiencing inside the walls of her skin to a degree that I can't even imagine. Our relationship continued to get worse as I went through high school, I became a teenager, got very bad in high school. Then I went to college. I went to college nearby because I was nervous. Part of the reason I was nervous about being away from her. But she had my sister, so my sister could drive by that point. We were kind of doing all the driving for her. After college, I moved in with her for a year and kind of realized that it had gotten a lot worse. You know, I had moved in with her, and she had this tendency of just walking around the house muttering under her breath, "I just want to fucking die." And pardon my language here, if you're listening to this around kiddos. I didn't mean to say the F word, but that's the language she used. And she would just say this several times a day. And to the point that I had to confront her, and I had to tell her, like, I'm sorry that this is your reality, but I can't be here for this. So we need a solution. And she stopped saying it. She never really like let me in to what was going on with her in any other way. So it's like the only way she would share something with me was when it got that bad, like that desperate. And so on one hand, it's like, thank you for being vulnerable and opening it up to me. But on the other hand, you're doing it in this way that's scary, terrifying, really. And eventually, I after that year that I lived with her after college, I ended up moving to Chicago. It was really fun, actually. She got to visit me in Chicago while I was living there. And I was shocked as hell that she was actually able to like get on a plane by herself and do that. We got into some crazy fights, of course, in Chicago, ending up in some ER somewhere because this neighborhood cat had bit her and had drew blood. And that was always problematic when she was drawing blood because she was on blood thinners. And so it wasn't clotting. Then, of course, it took forever for any wound of hers to heal. Just nothing was ever normal, you know? And when she died, I wasn't there. I was in Chicago. I got a call from my aunt who said, you know, she'd had a heart attack the night before. They'd resuscitated her. She was stable, but it looked likely that it was going to happen again. A couple of hours later, I got another call from my aunt saying it happened again. They resuscitated her. She's stable. What do you want to do? Because I was her decision maker. So, of course, Ollie and I are jumping on a plane at that point, you know, trying to get home. And I said, it's time. You know, because they'd been clear with us. They were like, even if she survives this, she has several broken ribs. Something's up with her liver at this point. I'm like, what's going on with her liver? So it was just like, hey, it's let's do this thing. And my aunt had asked me, do you want to talk to her? Well, she was in a coma, like she was stabilized, but she was in a coma. And so I said, no, I don't want to talk to her. Part of the reason I said that was because our relationship had been getting way more distant in the months leading up to that. You know, normally we would talk at least once a week and we would share things, and you know, it could only get to a certain level, but we loved each other, and she was interested in my life and wanted to know everything I was doing. And you know, when in the months leading up to it, our phone calls became less frequent, maybe once every 2 weeks. And then we would really only talk for like 15 minutes. And it would be really superficial. How's the weather there? How's the weather in San Diego? How's the weather in Chicago? Okay, love you, bye. And so that was part of why I said no, I didn't want to talk to her. The other part of it was like, well, this person's in a coma. And at this point, she's so close to the other side that whatever I want to say to her, I don't need to do it over the phone. Like, she can hear me. So I got off the phone, I closed my eyes, and I wept. And I said, "It's okay, Mom. I love you." And 10 minutes later, my aunt called me back, said she was gone. I never saw her body. Picked up her ashes. Went on a really fun boat tour to put her ashes in the ocean. And I did something really naughty that is totally against the rules that I know she would have loved, which was I scooped up some of her ashes and I put it in a Ziploc bag, and then I went to the zoo where she was volunteering at the zoo and she loved it. And so I went to the zoo, to all of her places, and I sprinkled a little bit of her ashes there. And that was the goodbye. And so you can see, or maybe you can imagine, living through this, it's produced a lot of questions in my mind. You know, we never got answers from the medical system. And now in 2024, autoimmune disease, it's like, who doesn't have one, right? And we're more educated about it, still not all the way. There's still so much of it that's a mystery. And if you are someone who struggles with an autoimmune disease, it's like, good freaking luck, man. You're gonna now have a part-time job of reading. You're gonna have to go read 50 books now that are like science textbooks. You're gonna have to go read 50 books. You're gonna have to go listen to 200 podcast episodes, and you're gonna have to go into a healthcare system and mercilessly defend yourself with a freaking machete. And then maybe you will discover some answers for yourself about how to heal. And what I have learned is that there was really nothing that the medical community could have done except for to educate her and to advise her on fixing different parts of her life that were making her sick. Because what made her sick was her mind. That was huge. Her emotional states, huge. Her relationships were making her sick. Her relationship with my dad, which did end up, by the way, blowing up when I was in high school. And it was partly my fault. But, you know, I think it was good, actually, for both of them to part ways at that point. You know, I didn't understand for a long time why he stayed in that relationship, but now that I'm a little bit older, I get it. You know, this was his family. We were his children. Her relationships were making her sick. That desire, like, deep in her heart, right? Like, you know, at some point when life is just, it's not shaping up to be what you always dreamed it could be. And I really think when she had me, that was like she was passing the baton to me, like this hope of, hey, kiddo, you go create this life for yourself. Because, you know, she did fucking amazing things for me. She made me believe that anything was possible for me. She made me believe that I could do anything and I could be anyone. And that is why I'm sitting here recording a podcast episode right now. Thank you. On the one hand, she's calling me all these nasty names. On the other hand, she's praising me. Like there was also that side to her too. But her unlived dreams, that's a burden, right? Like I could see her struggling with that when she was sick, and she was wrestling with it. She was trying shit, like she had to stop working pretty early on. And at some point she decided to become an entrepreneur and start a body perch. It was called Body Perch. It was a business that existed for a couple of years there. We were a bird family. We loved our pet birds, and she would go to the thrift stores and she would buy vests and cut the bottom off of them, so you just kind of had this like drape over your shoulders that buttoned up in the front. And then she would sew on little dowels from Home Depot that fit the birds' feet and put little leather and beads on there so they had some toys to play with. And we would go walking in Mission Bay wearing our body perches with the birds, and everyone loved it, of course. And so she actually did that as a business and was gung-ho about that and had customers, and we had ads in bird magazines. She was interested in writing. I know she had wanted to be a writer. But God, her belief system made her sick. She never really believed that she could heal. She never believed she had the power to do so. She believed that her life was over. And that belief was in her and it was in us that first day one, when I was looking at those drapes. You can't get better if you think that you can't get better. And that maybe seems obvious to us now, but it only seems obvious to us because so many people lived through their lives in this other way that we were able to benefit from them and learn from them and learn from their example. Her food was making her sick. She was pretty healthy, all things considered, but, we were raised on fast food. We were raised on packaged food, TV dinners, basically ultra processed food to the extreme. And so we were not giving her body the right inputs to heal. Exercise, non-existent. She spent almost all day, every day in bed. Where's my mom? She's in bed. Or she's at the hospital. One of the two. And so we never cracked the code. Like that was a trial and tribulation. My goodness. And we were not able to crack the code on that. The villain won. And here I am as a healthy 36-year-old. My mom got sick when she was 38. And here I am as a healthy 36-year-old who has made choices up to this point largely in reaction to what I lived through. And so I've read those 50 books and I've listened to those 200 podcast episodes. And I still have questions. I have a lot of questions. It is not clear how we ought to be living in this day and age. It's not clear how we should be taking care of ourselves, how we should be taking care of each other, our environment, how we should be innovating into a better future. Who's optimistic about the future these days? Like, I want to be. How are we supposed to keep this human project going? How are we supposed to thrive? We've got to restore some optimism. And I lived so long under the rain cloud of pessimism. I won't do it. I will not do it. I will figure this out. Okay? And so that's why. That's why I'm starting this podcast. Because I have questions and they are not always all answered by the research that I'm doing. And it's not clear where to go to get those answers. Should I be enrolling in school to be a doctor so I can have the same sort of specialized siloed information as the medical team who was working with my mom? Should I go to medical school and become a doctor so that I can go against the grain and I can go do something else? Should I go become a physical therapist, a psychologist, a spiritual teacher, a strength trainer, a nutritionist? Yes. Yes, and all of that. I want to know all of it. I want to understand the system that we are a part of, and to know the systems within systems. It's like this Russian nesting doll effect of systems. And so that's why I'm starting this. Here's what you can expect. I'm going to invite experts on the podcasts to talk about topics that I spend a lot of time thinking about and researching and that are kind of gumming me up. And in the pursuit of that, I'm gonna fumble. I'm gonna ask the wrong thing. I'm going to neglect questions that I probably should be asking but aren't because they just didn't cross my mind at the time that I was having the conversation. I'm gonna explore rabbit holes that lead me nowhere and rabbit holes that get me everywhere. And what I hope to get from it is clarity. What I also hope to get from it is community. I've recorded now 6 interviews with people, and I can see how it's shifted my brain and how I'm perceiving things differently, thinking about things differently, asking different questions. It's been really cool to have these 6 people in my corner and being able to come back to them afterwards with follow-up questions, and I'm really looking forward to more of that. And I'm looking forward to sharing this all with you because I have no idea how you're going to react to this. Is this going to be interesting to you? Are you going to be bored out of your freaking mind? I have no idea. Are you going to know what we're talking about? Am I going to be talking way over your head? Am I going to be hitting on anything that you feel is relevant to you? I need to feel you on the other side of this. So if you can promise me to reach out to me through reviews, through comments, by replying to emails, etc., and let me know, where am I hitting the mark? Where am I missing the mark? You don't even need to say it nicely. Everybody's always like, hey, I'm a human, like say things to me nicely. Yeah, that would be nice, but just say it however you say it, and I'll take it to ChatGPT, and I'll go, ChatGPT, this person said this really mean thing to me in a comment. What do you think is the one nugget that I should take out of this? That's what I'll do. And so I encourage you now that I've been rambling for almost an hour to go listen to episode 1. Because I'm dropping it at the same time as this episode, I think, unless Cass tells me to do something otherwise, in which case, wait a week or whatever it is. But go listen to the first episode. My first guest is Kristen Williams, and she is just a wealth of knowledge about the human body. She's a physical therapist who treats people at a systems level rather than spot treatment, which you'll soon find out is kind of a big issue in the physical therapy community is spot treatment. You go in complaining about your shoulder, so the physical therapist treats your shoulder without looking at what's going on elsewhere in the system. So she's just brilliant in that regard. You're going to learn a ton of stuff from that episode. And she's also one of my favorite yoga teachers, which is how I know her because I practice with her online. The way that if you practice with me online, I practice with her online. So go watch that episode and tell me what you think about it. Be really curious to know. And I'll say thank you for tuning in, for giving me the platform to share my story. And I'm really looking forward to this. Let's do it.